yeah, for everybody listening, obviously it's been a couple of weeks, I think, at this point. We were both out last week doing something cool. And, full disclosure, we were both traveling too. So I spent the last 4 days driving across the country. Didn't have much to come here and talk about, but today is kind of a normal work day for me. So in the course of my research, I stumbled across a couple of things that I thought would be kind of fun to chat about. The first thing I want to do, I just found something that kind of blew my mind, and I want to talk about it here. But in order to do it, I got to set it up, and there's a slight visual component. So for everybody listening, I'm going to start it like this. For you, Tim, and everybody listening, I want you to imagine an apple. Okay. Now, when I say imagine an apple, what comes into your mind? Can you see like a full-on high-def apple?
I don't really see anything around it. I'm just looking at like a shape of an apple.
Okay, let me just walk you through this first, Tim. So apparently there's a graded scale in terms of what people can imagine when you ask them to imagine a shape or something like that. And for everybody listening, I'm looking at a screen right now, and there's like 5 silhouettes of somebody's head, just black silhouettes. And I guess the ironic thing about describing this is if you fall on a certain part of this spectrum, even describing it won't really mean much. But there's these 5 silhouettes, numbered 1 through 5, and number 1 has like a full-on HD apple, like an image of an apple in it, and then 2 is like maybe a drawing of an apple with color. It's like a colored kind of animation or a cartoon of an apple. 3 is an outline of an apple within like grayscale. 4 is just kind of a monochrome blob that looks vaguely like an apple, and then 5 is blackness. And this is supposed to signify the fact that certain people can imagine a shape in full-on 3D HD color, and then others, when you have them imagine something, they'll see something else along this spectrum in their head, ranging from maybe just a toned down version all the way to sheer blackness. And it's just, they can think of the concept of an apple, but they can't see the apple. Looking at this scale, where do you think you'd place yourself?
Pretty close to a 1, but a 2.
Okay, interesting. Me too. I think it would probably depend on how familiar I was with whatever I was being asked to imagine. But for me, it's the same way. It's mostly like, you ask me to imagine even something random like a beach, right? And I full on color, sound, like I can turn up and down the beach and see the whole thing in my mind. And it's shocking to me to realize that not only can some people not do that, but it's like shocking to them to realize
that other people can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just saw this before we hopped on here. And the reason I bring it up is, first of all, I think this is fascinating. But second, I think there's a whole business tied up in this concept, because I had no idea. And there's really big implications of this, right? Like if I'm talking to somebody and let's say they happen to be one of these people who doesn't have this, like they can't visualize something the same way that I do. If I'm not aware of that when we're planning a project together, or if maybe they're a client and I'm trying to sell them on something, like there are massive implications to this gap in communication. And I never even knew this was a thing. I mean, when you say it in retrospect, maybe it seems obvious that this exists, but to not even be aware that you could be talking to somebody who sees the world like this, I think is a huge deal. And so I think there's the whole business tied up in this. And I think it could have like a couple of aspects. One would be like employee personality type testing, right? Like, and there are other companies that do this, like that disc analysis and stuff. Tony Robbins' company. Yeah. And that's, like, what's the famous one? Myers-Briggs.
That's what it is. Myers-Briggs. Yes. Thank you. I've taken this before. I know what it is. I know what it's called. It's Myers-Briggs.
Yeah. And companies pay good money to have their employees take those tests.
Sure.
And maybe, it's kind of interesting. Like, are you introverted or extroverted or whatever the criteria is that they rank on. But I don't know of anybody who is out there testing for this specifically. And it seems like it would be a big issue among teams that are trying to collaborate, right? Like especially inside of a company, because in a company, your job is to build something that doesn't necessarily exist yet, right? And if everyone's kind of seeing a different version of that, that could be big. So I think there's an opportunity there. And then I also think there's some kind of opportunity tied up in like audience research of some kind, because again, I think a lot of advertising sort of assumes that everybody lands closer to the 1 or 2 end of this scale, where they can picture what you're talking about in like full color HD. And it would be really interesting to run an entire, what's the word I'm looking for? Agency. Thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
That specifically focuses on like catering to the 4s and 5s in your funnel, you know? It's like, hey, how do you sell to somebody who can't even picture the benefit that you're trying to convey to them? You know, I think you could specialize in that. I think it'd be like $1 million business.
I think that's really cool. What comes to mind for me here is it's so much within that you brought this up because it was just this morning I was having a conversation. So I'm in the middle of a deal right now, and the person I'm talking to about this deal is the marketing manager. And if this deal closes, I'm going to have to be working pretty closely with this marketing manager. And so she is used to having like a say on the website and the stories that are told on the website. And she gave me this example. Hold on. Let me pull it up. All right. So I'm on the farmersdog.com and it's dog food, basically. It's like home cooked organic dog food. This is actually a really, really huge business in case anybody's wondering when I was looking at this not too long ago, it blew my mind. Little side note, there was a thing about pricing that Seth Godin said that always stuck in my head where he said your dog doesn't care how much your dog food costs. It's the person who cares how much the dog food costs. And so I always think about that when I'm pricing something where it's like, who am I actually pricing this for? And so that's a
Oh,
little
that's
side tangent.
awesome.
That's how I went into like a rabbit hole about the pet food industry and like how much sugar is pumped into it and all this crazy stuff. Anyway, so if you're on the website, you scroll down a little bit, there's a header that said you shouldn't be the only one eating healthy. And as you continue to scroll, there's a bowl of healthy, organic looking foods. There's like a steak and some carrots and kale and I don't know, it looks like parsley and a sweet potato. And as you keep scrolling down, there's like a white bar that goes across the bowl. And as you finish the scroll, the white bar, what do you say, like washes
Swipes.
over,
Yeah.
yeah, swipes over the bowl, kind of like a windshield wiper. And she said, I want to do something like this and use visuals to tell the story. And so that's the part that really got in my head because I've been thinking a lot recently about Jack Butcher and how good he is at using visuals to accentuate writing and to tell stories. And for the first time in like my career, if you want to call it that, I've always sort of pushed visuals aside a little bit and said like that's not as important as the copy. That's not as important as the copy. Like don't get stuck in the visuals. But I still believe that to be true. But I'm at a point now where I'm thinking, you know what? And the hustle does this so freaking well. Like the memes that they use and shit like that, the stories that they tell with the visuals, it always sticks in my head. And so in my newsletter, I've been putting a lot more visuals in. And so the purpose of this little tangent is to show that maybe the opportunity there isn't necessarily to say that we can appeal to these people that might be in the 4 or a 5. Maybe the opportunity there is to realize that people could be in a 4 and a 5 and to say, we know you can't visualize this. We're just going to make it so blatantly obvious for you and create like a whole agency around this. This tells such a story in such a simple visual. And what is this service called? You know what I mean? It's not copywriting. It's not graphic design. It's like visual storytelling. And when I look at that, that's the huge opportunity that I see.
That's so interesting. It's funny that you went this direction with it because I think this actually ties in with another little thing that I had kind of set aside that I thought you might be interested in, but I had no natural sort of path into it. So I wasn't sure if we were ever going to get there. But I think you just created that. I stumbled across a list of copywriters. Like somebody on Twitter basically said, hey, post your favorite copywriters here. And everyone dropped a whole bunch of links and stuff like that. And I started going through a whole bunch of them. And a lot of them were really interesting. They did work for big companies, but by and large, 80 to 90% of their portfolios looked exactly the same. Like you get to their landing page and it's a series of tiles that says the name of the company they worked for, and you can click through and you can see something about like whatever the campaign was that they built. Then there were a handful that really stood out. And what I think is unique about the ones that I bookmarked is that they combined visual storytelling and copy in order to do something that was really unique. And again, I guess this is going to turn out to be a slightly visual episode, but for anybody who's listening to this, I'll just describe it as we go. The reason I think these are so cool, well, maybe a few reasons. One, like you said, it leverages an opportunity that I think a lot of people are leaving on the table. Like a lot of people maybe focus on copy to the exclusion of everything else. They'll just throw some, stock images into a website in order to sell.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that can work for a long time because the copy is so important. But what I'm finding with these examples, at least, is that like one or two really great visuals can be an incredible way to set yourself apart. And, you mentioned the hustle. We try to do a lot of unique visuals there. In fact, we got one guy, Zach, who is kind of like our meme lord because he's, he'll design like his own memes or GIFs for each story that he writes. And they're always hilarious. And they travel. That's the other thing. So it doesn't just stand out. It's like a great image can travel around the web in a way that copy doesn't necessarily travel. So let me share a couple of these with you real quick. Okay, so there's three I want to get to real quick, and I'll start with this one. So this is Joe Coleman. Shout out to Joe. And when you click on his website, you're basically brought to this very simple black landing page, white text on it. It's like one paragraph of text. But what's so unique, and it says, hey, I'm Joe Coleman. I'm Joe Coleman. I'm a freelance copywriter. I come up with words and concepts that help you win pitches and pick up awards. It's basically a little bit of a pitch. But what's awesome is at the very bottom of the page, there's a slider. And the slider is kind of set to the middle. But at the far ends, it says less hard sell and more hard sell. And as you drag the slider around, the copy on this page changes. And what I love about this, the reason this is so unique from a copywriting perspective is because like this takes the concept of show, don't tell to a whole different level.
Exactly.
Great copy shows people things, right? That's kind of what we're talking about here. Like it makes you visualize the benefits that you're going to get and in a way that you may not get otherwise. But when you're selling copywriting services, there's this like matrix meta kind of extra level where you have to be able to show people what real professionalism does, like why it's important to have somebody who's great at what they do, writing copy. So here, as I scroll all the way to the left, less hard sell, the copy just adjusts, and finally gets whittled down all the way to, so yeah, I'm a freelance copywriter, what of it? Which is funny because it basically tells you something about, kind of the experience of a soft sell. And then if you go all the way to the right here, this is hilarious. You're going to like this. So like you go right and the copy just gets more and more intense. So, maybe 75% of the way up the scale, it says weapons grade copy for advertising and design. And, some of the phrasing gets more and more intense. And then you get higher up, maybe 80%. And the headline changes to book me before the agency you're pitching against does. Right. So he starts incorporating fear into the equation. And you get all the way up at the end, the colors change. All of a sudden there's like explosions going off on the page.
Oh, this is amazing. Angry cats and dogs skateboarding.
Yeah, at the very top end, it's just like a blinking, flashing screen, his number in huge red text. It's like his number is literally covering whatever the sales copy is, so you can't even read it. And there's just a hand pointing towards his number. So I love this. This is so creative. It's a great example of showing your expertise rather than just splashing some text on a page, showing that you understand the nuance of what it is you do and how it exists on a spectrum.
You know what else I love about that is naturally everybody's going to go to the more hard sell just because they want to see it. And then when somebody calls him every single time, what's the first thing that they're going to say? And it's weird how like what I'm recognizing about that is I would never call somebody and be like, hey, I read the copy on your website. You sold me. But I would call somebody and say, hey, I saw that crazy flashing light on your website. Like, oh my gosh, that's so funny. And, every time Joel gets that call, he's got to be like, ha ha ha, yeah, like, did you like it? I'm sure he's taken that call a million times. But man, how effective.
That's such a great point. Yeah, it's almost because like great copy, you almost don't even realize you're being exposed to it. It's just taking that and turning it into something else. Okay, so I've got one or two other ones. Here, this is a great one. Full stop, new paragraph. It's a company run by John Ryder. So you land on the page, big yellow page, and a small, maybe sentence of text. It says, warning, you're about to read some pretty dreadful copy. When you're ready, click here. So you click there, and then the page loads, and it's like a full page of just in your face text, probably 5-6 paragraphs, hundreds of words. And the general point is like, this is way too long. In fact, he says it right up front. He says, okay, brace yourself because this is a mess. For starters, this copy is way too long. So here's a bit of advice. Don't read it all. You're better off just scrolling to the end. Blah, 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 blah. The whole page kind of talks through the art of copywriting, but it's kind of sprinkled through it. There's these little highlights. And I didn't realize this until I read the entire thing. But if you just read the highlights, it says, we need to cut this by at least half, cut straight to the chase, get to the point, and then it says press the right buttons at the very end. And what happens is if you click any one of these, this is why I love this. I didn't realize this until after I'd read the entire thing, but you click any one of these and the words reformat. Yep. Half the page disappears. And what he's basically doing is editing live in front of you, right? So the second says, right, this is a little better. Still needs work, but now you know that I write websites, print and digital marketing, that kind of thing. You can find out about my clients, blah, blah, blah. The second version is about, I don't know, 30%, 30 to 40% as long as the first. And yeah. And then there's a chance to click again. And as you click again, it continues to refine the text. And you kind of do this over and over again until, yep, it gets down to basically a 5-word pitch. And what I liked about this is similar to what I liked about the previous one, which is it's showing the art of copywriting live in front of you rather than just trying to say, I'm a great copywriter. So that's a second one that I really like.
It just has my brain spinning. Like, what are the visual opportunities for, we need to like define this. That's kind of what's going on in my head, because we're not talking about graphic design, right? We're not talking about creating a picture or like a PDF. And we're also not necessarily talking about in-text images. Like people love looking at graphs, right? Those work really well within a text, and people like looking at funny GIFs or memes or whatever. I mean, I've been doing a thing, and you commented on it on my personal blog, where my designer takes a stock image that's kind of ridiculous and then takes a screenshot of my face and like puts it on top of it. And just like that little thing has gotten me a couple comments, which I think is funny, but also I don't take it too seriously. But that's not what we're talking about either. Like, we're talking about the intersection between persuasive language and remarkable visuals, right? Something's remarkable if it's worthy of making a remark about. What is that? Like, what is this service? If fullstopnewparagraph.com, I forget what you said his name was.
John Ryder.
John Ryder, yes. If John Ryder on here, on this screen right here, on the full stop new paragraph, tell stories brilliantly, hire a copywriter, also had a button, on the right hand side that said, like this page, hire me to do what? Like, what is this? What's this new thing that we're inventing? It's like HTML5 kind of.
It definitely is. It definitely, well, I mean, I don't know for certain if it's HTML5, but that's the kind of thing, that you're leaning on. It's like these websites have gone one step beyond a static page. It's not even just incorporating multimedia. What I'm thinking of, I'm trying to turn this into a framework. And the closest thing that I can think of off the cuff is, imagine your website, like the frame of your website is actually just the frame of a video player. What would that video look like if it could look like anything for you? So it's almost like, instead of imagining your site as a piece of paper, which I think most people do, imagine it as a television screen. And then, like, what does that experience look like? Because it's something. Right. It's something that's not quite it, but I feel like that we're getting a little bit closer to encapsulating this in a single rule for success. And then there's another aspect of this, which is like, it's about conveying something to the audience that they can't forget through an experience, and that's kind of the word that I'm grasping for, is like, you're elevating the experience of your website. And it doesn't have to be a website. Like, I think what's really interesting about this is that the people who do this best find ways to do it in all sorts of mediums. Like, there's a famous example. Derek Sivers, when he was running CD Baby, he had the thank you email.
Yeah.
And for anybody who's not familiar with that story, the story goes, when you ordered a CD from CD Baby, you'd get this like really ridiculous, over the top thank you email that says, our packing agents have put on white velvet gloves in order to pick your CD off the shelf. And it was so remarkable. Ooh, maybe that's the thing. It's remarkable that people started talking about it. And so the website gets its own following, not necessarily for the product or service they provide, but for the way that they talked about it, the way that they shared that message with the world. If Seth Godin were looking at this, he would probably say, like, what this person has done is they've chosen to make their website itself remarkable. Maybe there's something to that.
Still on topic, when you said it's more than just a website, that was perfect timing, because in my mind, you ever read Delivering Happiness by any chance?
No, this Zappos, right? That's exactly. The Zappos story.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing book. One of the books as I was like first dreaming about, like, hey, wow, maybe I can be a successful business person on my own, where I got like hope from Tony Hsieh. And he died last year, and it was like really upsetting to me. It hurt me for like a day or two, because that book was so impactful, and like his message. And he designed his whole entire business. And if you read the book, this isn't an exaggeration. All he did was count the amount of times that his customers said wow over the phone. And he called it the wow factor. And the idea with Zappos was that it was fueled by service. That's what they said. He said that we sell shoes, but it doesn't really matter what we sell. It's kind of irrelevant. Like, what we sell is a customer experience. And if they still do it to this day, by the way, it's still very much baked in their culture, even though, like they say, the golden days of Zappos, I think, got eaten up by Amazon. Amazon acquired them about 10 years ago, but they kept their culture. I'm just saying that they kind of dissolved into the same thing. Even still, to this day, you can call Zappos and ask them to find you a pizza. And no bullshit, like, they will stay on the phone, call the pizza place, order it for you, make sure they have the address, and deliver it to you. And by the way, I've done it before, and it's hysterical. No, I'm dead serious. You can do anything. You can call them and just talk to them for an hour. They will never push you off the phone. The whole entire idea is how to get them to say wow. Because I collect Chuck Taylors. And, when I first started making a little bit of money, like, I guess probably 9 years ago or so, I spoiled myself and I bought 3 pairs of Chuck Taylors, and I'll never forget it. They delivered them overnight to my doorstep. I bought them at night. I got up early. I caught the bus. I was living in Florida, down Congress Avenue to this call center that I was working at. I got home, and there was a box of all of 3 of the shoes and a bouquet of flowers that just said, yeah, like, this is the first time you delivered from us. We just want you to know how much we appreciate you. And, you say, what did you just say?
Yeah, great point. Wow. Yeah, and here we are 9 years later talking about it still. Like, so did that investment pay off for them? Yeah, it sounds like it.
Certainly. And he had all types of examples. I might have talked about this one on the pod before. If I did, forgive me for repeating myself. But this woman was a lawyer in Midtown Manhattan, and every week she was buying a new pair of like Gucci's and Louboutins and Louis Vuittons, and just balling out on shoes. But Zappos has a 365-day, no questions asked, shipping both ways, paid for return policy. So she would buy a pair of shoes and just ball out in the law firm with, $2,000 shoes for a week, put it in the box, and then send it back. And eventually what happened? So many people in Midtown Manhattan all started asking her, like, where are you getting these shoes? Like, where do you buy your shoes? I love your shoes. And the board at Zappos was like, this woman is robbing us blind. We cannot keep doing this. And he said, look at all the sales around Midtown Manhattan over the last year. And just this wow factor, this word of mouth, created such an influx of chatter, basically, which, I guess, bringing it back to what we're talking about, is what this is, right? It's like, it's visual, experiential guerrilla marketing that leads to chatter. I mean, how many times have we said these guys' and gals' names on our show, right?
Yeah.
So we're on to
Yeah.
something, man.
Choosing to be remarkable and finding those areas. And I think that's kind of where it starts, like finding those areas where people are not necessarily being remarkable yet. Like your
Like
homepage is
what?
one example, but it's probably the highest contested. Like it's, there's a lot of competition for a great website, right? But there's a lot of areas, a lot of places where people like have touch points with customers and they're just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. All of those are opportunities to be remarkable. Can I show you one more that I think is pretty cool?
Definitely.
So this is a little bit different because it's not really the website experience that I thought was so interesting. It was the product. So this is a copywriter named Trevor Joplin,
Love
and
how the mouse
he
turns into
piece
a
of corn.
piece of corn. What is this?
Hey, I mean that's great. That's actually another example. I don't know. I didn't look into it, but yeah, his whole website for whatever reason the cursor is a piece of corn, and when you go to his home, it just says corn eaters only. And like apparently he's obsessed with corn. Said I'm addicted to corn. And the whole his whole like front page video is it looks like a newsreel from MTV True Life that was
Did,
about
did
porn
he make it
addicts.
himself?
Well, it's slightly. So the MTV clip is about porn addicts, but he every time they say porn,
He says
he dubs
corn.
it over with corn. Yeah. So he collaborates with this other copywriter named Eleanor Rast.
God, I love this.
And I'm not sure if they're a couple or if they work together or what the deal is, but a lot of the projects have been a collaboration between the two of them. And one of them is called Her Story. So this is really interesting. The whole basis of this product is it's an AR app, augmented reality, specifically designed to insert new content into the most popular history book that's taught in West Coast schools. So they went to California. They basically said, well, here's
Like an
kind of, this
academic
is,
history book?
what's that?
An academic history book?
Yeah. So they basically went to schools and there's not that many of them, right? The pretty small curriculum, like at the junior high school level, basically found the most popular one. And they said, okay, well, there's a problem with this book, which is that, almost 90% of it is about men. And obviously, men and women both made history. So how are we going to help balance that out? They made this AR app where when you point it at the pages of the history book, it will pick up on photos in the book, like headshots of certain guys, and then it uses augmented reality to overlay the story of a related woman right there. So, and I don't know any of the examples because the write up wasn't very specific, but like let's just say, I mean, I know there's one story from history where George Washington like needed funding for something, and his wife was actually integral in getting the funding because she was able to kind of confer with all the other wives of all the other Congress people.
Mm.
And obviously, even if they fight in Congress, they got to go home to their wives at the end of the day. So all the wives basically got together and got this thing through. The idea of this app would be like when you look at the book and you kind of point the phone at George Washington's face, it would overlay with the story of Martha Washington and maybe one or two of those anecdotes. And it's a cool product, but what it got me thinking about was how much this is a crazy opportunity.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of people are excited about AR for obvious reasons. But what I never thought before is how it allows you to capitalize on other people's success and popularity. Like,
Yeah.
just imagine this for a second. Like, this is kind of an extreme example, and I don't know if it would work long term, but what might it look like if you were just creating AR augmentations for New York Times best-selling books throughout the course of the year that somehow advertise your company or your firm? Like what AR allows you to do is basically pick something that's well known, popular, and say, hey, we're going to add our 2 cents to this thing. And I had never thought about that until I saw this implementation. But I think there's a crazy amount of opportunity that's going to continue to play out. And frankly, they're going to have to rewrite the rules on some of this stuff because I
Yeah.
know mainstream authors and stuff are not going to be happy with like, hey, oh, I disagree with this person's book. Well, I'm just going to do an AR overlay. So like everybody who bought whatever, the 4 Hour Work Week, well, I'm going to give you my 2 cents. And like, if you point your camera at page 40 of the book, you'll get my blog post that like, shows up on X, Y, and Z if you use this app. There's going to be a lot of that as people catch on to this more and more, like the advertising potential for AR. And this was the first time I kind of realized it.
I agree with you totally. And this is also remarkable and a little bit of a sidestep, but it's one that is cool that we're talking about because I'm a bird watcher. You may know that I post pictures of the birds that I find. And when I do that, in like bird watching communities, you either need a picture or you need somebody that was there with you. You can't just say like, hey, I saw this bird. Like, yeah, you might have, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't count. It's just kind of like a rule that we have. And as I'm like scouring the country, always on the lookout for birds, I think to myself pretty damn often, someone should make an AR app that as soon as you get a picture of a bird, and I thought about this with Google image search, because sometimes I see a bird, and I know a lot of birds, but sometimes I think like, I don't know what that is. And so I get a picture and I reverse image search it to see if Google can recognize the pattern and I can find out what bird it is. And every single time that happens, I think to myself, why doesn't somebody create an app for bird watching in particular? But they could do this with anything. But bird watching just has like really tight communities. I know it's like a weird thing, but it's like a really passionate community. And there's got to be some developers in there that think, okay, you got a picture of a bird. Let's upload an AR experience that could show this bird doing what it would do in nature or whatever, so that you can actually get a feel of the behavior of this bird. And so what I think to myself a lot when I think about AR and even like some of the metaverse stuff that is just inevitable that we continue to talk about because it seems so inevitable that it is going to integrate itself into our society. I don't think that we're going to be creating like new worlds. I think that we're going to be creating like secondary worlds around the things that are already around us. So take the example that I just said. Well, now what if you do it with flowers, right? How many times do people walk down the street and say, oh, what a pretty flower. Let me take a picture of it. And what would you normally do? You would post it on Instagram, right? But that's Web 2.0. Why wouldn't you like pop a button and say like, oh, wow, like I'm immersed in this new world for a second. So I know it's a little bit of a leap as to like where we were, but as soon as I see AR, I don't think it's going to be like Pokemon Go, where we create like a brand new world that we need to interact with. I think it's going to be kind of like secondary things, just like this is the actual world that you live in. Now let me create an experience to sort of like accentuate this world just one step further.
Totally. And I think bird watching is actually a great example for that because it does, well, there's a couple reasons. One is because it does feel niche to anybody who's outside of it, right? So anybody who's not a bird.
Niche. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so interestingly, we actually wrote about this at Trends, and it's like the whole world of ornithology is way bigger than I ever would have expected.
Yeah, you'd be surprised, man. We go
like,
deep.
Yeah, man. So I'm looking at it right now, just to give people some background in this. Like, if you're outside, if you're not a bird watcher, you hear somebody say, I'm a bird watcher, and you're just like, oh, that's quaint. Like, who else does that? Turns out a lot of people. So here are a couple quick facts. I don't know where this currently stands. This was written about a year ago, but at that time, the ornithology subreddit had grown 650% in a year, from 20,000 to 128,000 people. And in 2021, more people than ever logged their bird sightings in the UK's Big Garden Birdwatch. 3 times as many 18 to 29-year-olds participated and more than twice as many 30 to 34-year-olds. So like the audience is growing really fast. And get this is crazy. Birdwatching is a big business. There are 47 million bird watchers, and they spend $41 billion a year on trips and equipment in the US. And that was in 2011.
You're not going to believe this, but right here in my office next to me, I got my binoculars. God, I can't believe this just happened. I got my binoculars right next to me because I got my window right here, and I live in Tennessee. So in Tennessee, it's a big bird watching state, but there's also eastern bluebirds around here, which are really, really cool. And so if I ever see one, I bust out my binoculars. It's so funny.
That's awesome. Yeah, so the point here is like even these things that you would probably assume from the outside are really small communities can be huge. And if you can get in front of them in a way that and like connect, or even if you like, it's probably best if you belong to one of these communities. you can build a business in those that's way bigger than most people would have expected. Like, let me ask you this: what do binoculars cost? I'm assuming they're pretty pricey, right? They're not cheap.
They range for sure. Some of them
Mm,
are very powerful, and some of them are even more powerful because they have photography attached to them. So like the zoom is also dubbed as like a photography lens, which is the holy grail with birding and bird watching. They're actually two separate things if you want to get like super strict about it. But if you get the picture, it's like a treasure hunt. Those apps really within the last 5 years have what's made it so popular just because of the whole idea of like, I got one, right?
gotta catch them all.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And like going back to my original point there is I don't think that remarkable products that are gonna be made need to be like so grand in this whole new alternate universe. I really think the things that we were looking at today where it's just a slight deviation of the norm, a thing that just sort of really, really sticks in your head. I think those are going to be the opportunities in the next 10 to 15 years as people develop the new internet, more or less. I don't even know what we call it yet. I don't think the term metaverse actually applies because, I'm repeating myself, but we're not building like a whole new world. We're building like a virtual layer on top of what we already live in. And that virtual layer is going to be different depending on the shit that you're into. And so I think that's pretty exciting.
Definitely. Hey, can I ask you one more question before we wrap this up?
Sure.
Have you ever read the book Snow Crash or listened to it?
Uh,
Has it
no,
ever crossed your radar at all?
no, this might not be real, but wasn't that the book that was just on Tim Ferriss' podcast yesterday with Mark Zuckerberg? Is that like a sci-fi book?
It is sci-fi.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that episode yet, so maybe I didn't realize that Zuck was on Tim's podcast. That's pretty interesting. I'll have to go
Yeah,
listen to
he's
that.
doing like a whole I'm not a bad guy. I don't take down, like civil democracy alone. Please like me. See, I'm just a regular person tour.
Well, maybe we should have him on.
Yeah. No, right, Zach, if you're listening.
If you think it came up, it probably was the same book because this is apparently pretty foundational sci-fi. It's written back in the 90s, and I think I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure it's the book that coined terms like the metaverse and hackers, and maybe I could be wrong about that. So if anybody can fact check me, but I'm listening to it right now, and the thing that gets me about it is I'm like probably 10 hours into this book. At this point, I'm just kind of listening to it like it's like a rage listen. Like I'm just listening to it to finish it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was great when it was written, but right now, how do I express this? I don't get the point of the book. It just seems like a pointless waste of time to me. And the reason is because everything that he talks about that like was sci-fi back when he first wrote it,
Real.
it's just real now. And so I have to keep reminding myself like, oh, this was really revolutionary back when he wrote it. Because now he just like, there'd be a whole chapter about how he walks into a bar in the metaverse and like, there's no legs on the tables because that would be pointless and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, we get it. We've seen the metaverse. Like that's how it is. And, it's funny to me because obviously it was very ahead of its time when it was written, and it's interesting to see how much has come true. But I don't know. There's like a version of our world where soon it's gonna like I kind of wonder if in the future they're gonna watch Star Wars and be like, who even likes this? It's like all you're just
Yeah.
it's like watching traffic footage for 2.5 hours. Yeah, we get it. People fly X-wings. Like it happens every day.
Comes down
Um,
south. You ever read the book Feed?
no, what's that about?
Also a very similar circumstance where I recommended it the other day, and I read it when I was in Germany. I read it in one sitting because it was my first week in Germany. I was very jet lagged. I was very like culture shocked. I wasn't quite fluent with my German yet, and so I couldn't speak to anybody. And I kind of had this day where I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. Let me just sit and read this book, which is kind of what I've done my whole life. And it's about kids that when they're born have the opportunity to get little chips. They call it a feed put into their brain. And the feed basically just gives them access to a network, more or less, where they can talk to each other either through text and send each other data straight through their feed.
Oh my
And
god.
there's this one girl that they meet that their parents were very religious, like traditionally religious, and said, no, we don't want our daughter to have a feed. And this girl had this freedom that everybody else who had the feed, like really envied and really wanted. But, ultimately, I'm going to spoil the book for you, but by the end of the book, ultimately, like she was just so disadvantaged that the whole world left her behind. So she was like this free butterfly flying around by herself in like an endless lonely void. And
Jesus.
yeah, and like that I was in Germany, so what, it was almost 20 years ago. I think I was in Germany when I was 17. I'm 35 now, so 18 years ago. And this was before iPhones, like I didn't have a cell phone in Germany. And now, we're all in the feed, and to imagine the freedom that we get
Wow.
when we lose our phone for 3 days, right? And you come back, you're like, oh, why do I even want this thing again? I was so free. But then you realize how disadvantaged you are. And that was another book where like I recommended it not too long ago, and I remember like, oh, I wonder, let me pick that book back up. And I was just like, I don't need to read this anymore because this is already true. This is real.
No. Yeah, it's so weird.
Let me find the title real quick just for people who might want to check it out. It's by Matthew Tobin Anderson. It's called Feed. It's really good. I read it in one session.
Do you think you would do the Neuralink thing if they get that like up and running inside your lifetime?
I would probably do it in the same way that like my grandparents use an iPhone, where my grandmother's like, "What are you texting me for? Just call me." Like I probably wouldn't have the capability to see its utility. I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? Like I remember when people first started having iPhones, very, very specifically telling my friend, I don't need that. That's a waste of time. I don't need an iPhone. And now there's no way I could live without it. I can literally run my life with my iPhone.
Yeah.
And, so who knows? Never say never, but it's definitely uncomfortable to think about.
For sure. Yeah. I feel the same way. I'm very torn on it. There's a part of me that says, well, if that's where society wants to go, like I'm okay getting left behind. Partly because I worry about, just having lived through the whole rise of smartphones, I know that you give something up when you embrace that technology.
Exactly.
And to take it to the next level doesn't sound
no matter what they say, nothing's free.
Exactly. Even with the metaverse, I feel that way sometimes. I'm like, social media hasn't worked out great. And so what's our idea? Just like make it more immersive. That's the idea behind the metaverse. We're like, oh, well, yeah, it's been great for everyone's happiness, anxiety, self-esteem. Let's take this up to 10, or 11. So there's a part of me that's like, well, just I'll bow out at that point. But then there's another part of me, and I admire this. And my grandfather's like this. Like he would 100% do it right now, no questions asked. He's very excited about what the future holds. In fact, I was headed to his birthday party like 2 weeks ago, and I noticed I bought him some programming books. He's learning how to program Raspberry Pi, and I was headed to the party. I'm like, I just noticed I'm going to my grandfather's birthday party. I have no idea how old he is, but I know that he's going to need these programming books for like what he's spending his time on. He's going to be so jazzed about these. So I admire that in him, his ability to just continually adapt to whatever the world like throws at you, just like embrace it. And so there is a part of me that goes, well, maybe, in for a penny, in for a pound, just go all in.
Yeah.
I don't know yet where I would actually end up on it, but it's interesting.
All right, man. Let's wrap this thing up. What did we talk about? We talked about
the
use of visuals. We talked about combining traditional copywriting with experience. We talked about, I guess, what we're going to call experiential marketing, whatever that means. Congratulations, Ethan. You invented a new industry. And then naturally we went into AR and metaverse because of course we did.
Yeah, everything ends up in the metaverse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let us know what you think. I want to know if anybody out there is rip roaring ready to go on the Neuralink thing. And that's it. I guess if you like this, go check us out on Twitter. I'm at Damn Ethan, and Tim is at, I can never remember yours. Tim Stoddard or Stodds? Tim Stodds. And thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate you. And we will talk to you next week.